The morning air in rural Montana carried a chill that bit deeper than just the cold. The skies, always so wide and open, now felt like a heavy lid above Claire Remington as she stood by the pasture fence, her fingers curled tightly around the old wood rail. Beyond it, horses grazed quietly, unaware of the finality that hovered like a storm about to break. Claire was just 23, but life had aged her in ways time alone never could. Her jeans were dust-stained, boots worn, and the once glossy shine in her auburn hair dulled by months of sleepless nights and grief. Her father, the backbone of the Remington Ranch, had passed away suddenly the previous winter, and with him went the ranch's strength, the finances, the protection. Debts had circled like wolves, and no matter how hard Claire worked, the numbers never turned in her favor. Now she was facing the one thing she swore she'd never do: auctioning off the horses. Every animal on that land had been a part of her life, but one in particular had her heart wrapped in ways words couldn't describe. Ash, a chestnut Mustang with a blaze down his face and fire in his soul. Ash had been her companion since he was a spindly-legged foal. She'd helped pull him into this world during a spring thunderstorm, her hands trembling as the mare struggled through labor. She'd bottle-fed him when his mother rejected him, slept beside him in the hay, and whispered dreams into his ear under star-strewn skies. He wasn't just a horse. He was a piece of her heart walking on four legs. Claire watched as Ash trotted along the fence line, his stride still full of that signature energy, ears alert, mane tousled by the breeze. He didn't know. None of them did. The buyers would arrive in an hour. Some would be gentle folks looking for ranch hands or pleasure riders, others less kind. Claire didn't dare think about the worst possibilities. She turned away from the fence and leaned against a weather-beaten post. Her throat burned, not from the wind, but from the pressure building in her chest. Inside the barn, a final invoice waited on the desk, a signature away from being complete. It wasn't just the end of a business. It was the end of a legacy. Generations of Remingtons had tilled this land, raised colts into champions, taught their children the value of dirt under fingernails and loyalty to the land. All gone. She was the last Remington now, and she was failing them. Ash came trotting up, stopping just short of her. He nudged her shoulder, eyes wide and questioning. Claire placed her hand against his cheek, fingers stroking the coarse hair, the warmth grounding her even as everything else fell apart. She pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked into the cold morning. "I didn't want this. I never wanted this." The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint sound of a truck engine rumbling down the long dirt road that led to the ranch gate. The buyers. Ash shifted, sensing something in her voice. He pawed the ground once, then stood still, head lowered, listening. Claire opened her eyes, pulling back to look at him. In his eyes, she didn't see blame. She saw trust. Even now, even in this, that crushed her more than any debt collector ever could. She stepped away, tears sliding freely now, and made her way toward the barn. One by one, the horses were led out, their names and brief histories read off as buyers circled and made offers. Claire stayed quiet. Each handover stabbed deeper, but she numbed herself. She had to. If she thought too long about where each horse might end up, she'd crumble. When it was Ash's turn, time slowed. The ranch hand led him out, and for a moment, the gathering hushed. Ash's presence demanded attention. He held his head high, muscles sleek beneath his coat, his blaze gleaming like firelight. Buyers murmured, but Claire stepped forward. No bidding. The crowd turned. She met the auctioneer's eyes. Ash is mine to lead. I'll choose who he goes with. The man hesitated, then nodded. One by one, she listened to offers. A rancher from Idaho, a breeder from Colorado, a trainer from Nevada. None felt right. Her heart screamed for her to pull back, to stop this, to fight harder. But it was too late. The ranch was gone. Finally, she handed the lead rope to a quiet man from northern Wyoming. He'd run a rescue for years. His hands were gentle, his voice calm. He promised Ash a field to roam and other Mustangs for company. Claire didn't speak. She just nodded, watched as Ash was loaded into the trailer, and stood motionless as the door slammed shut behind him. As the trailer pulled away, Ash neighed once, loud, sharp, and haunting. It echoed across the open land, through the trees, over the hills. Claire fell to her knees, fists in the dirt. "I'll find you again," she whispered. "I swear, I'll find you again." And as the dust settled on that bitter morning, the last thread of her old life slipped from her hands, but somewhere deep inside, a fire sparked, small but fierce. A promise, a vow. One day she would return, and when she did, Ash would know her. The years that followed felt like drifting through fog, silent, shapeless, and endlessly gray. After the final horse trailer rumbled out of the ranch yard, Claire Remington became a ghost of herself. With no land, no animals, and no anchor, she packed her few remaining belongings into the back of a rusted pickup and drove away from the only home she'd ever known. Her first stop was a small logging town in Idaho, where she worked as a waitress in a greasy roadside diner. She rented a room above a feed store, falling asleep each night to the scent of hay and oil. Her hands, once calloused from reins and saddle leather, now grew rough from dishwater and cheap bleach. No one there knew her name, and she liked it that way. She kept her story folded up tight inside her, like an old photograph too painful to look at, but too precious to throw away. When the snow came and business dried up, she moved again, north to Washington, then east to Colorado, then south through Wyoming. Each town was a stopgap, each job a brief attempt at survival. Gas station clerk, stable hand, motel cleaner, construction crew, cook. No matter how hard she worked, something always pushed her onward. Bills, layoffs, or that quiet ache that whispered she didn't belong. She tried city life once, Denver. For 6 months, she shared a basement apartment with 3 strangers, working days at a call center and nights cleaning offices. The money was steady, but the walls felt like prison bars. The noise, the lights, the concrete, it all scraped against something inside her. There were no stars, no horses, no smell of pine in the morning air. She felt like an imposter in someone else's world. After a while, she stopped unpacking boxes, but she kept a photo of Ash, folded and creased. It lived in the back of her wallet. Sometimes, when the loneliness pressed too close, she'd take it out, run her thumb over his blaze, and remember. The warmth of his breath on her shoulder, the way his ears flicked when she called his name, the promise she made. Every so often, she'd seek out horse rescues or auctions on the edges of whatever county she found herself in. She'd walk the pens slowly, searching faces, scanning for a chestnut Mustang with a proud head and deep, familiar eyes. Once, her heart leapt at the sight of a blaze too similar to ignore, but as she drew near, the gelding turned, and it wasn't Ash, not even close. Still, she couldn't stop looking. There were days she nearly gave up. Days when her bank account showed $2 and a gas tank showed empty. Nights when hunger gnawed and self-doubt tore at her resolve like winter wind through cotton. But something always kept her moving. The road ahead might have been uncertain, but the road behind held too much pain to ever return to. Claire aged in ways people didn't notice on the outside. Her shoulders grew harder. Her voice lost the light lilt it once carried. Her laugh, once easy and quick, became a rare and quiet thing. She was no longer the spirited rancher's daughter. She was a wanderer, defined by motion, shaped by loss. But she never forgot Montana. The memory of the land stayed with her, crisp as frost. She'd see it in dreams. The golden fields rolling out beneath wide skies, the sound of hooves thundering over dirt, the scent of sage after rain. And always, Ash was there, sometimes running free, sometimes looking at her from a distant ridge, unmoving, waiting. In Kansas, she worked a summer at a riding camp for troubled teens. The horses were skittish, the kids more so, but something in her presence calmed them both. They didn't know her story, but they listened when she spoke. She taught one girl how to braid a mane, another how to hold the reins without fear. For a brief moment she felt useful again, whole even. But autumn came, and with it, the camp closed. Claire packed up again, her duffel worn thin, her boots nearly soulless. She headed west this time, chasing nothing, hoping for something. In Nevada, she cleaned stalls at a desert ranch in exchange for food and a cot. The owner was a bitter man with a drinker's temper, but the horses were kind. She talked to them when no one was around, brushing out their manes like old friends. One night, she found herself leaning against a fence, staring at the stars, whispering into the dark. "Where are you, Ash?" No answer came, just whined across the sand. Then came Arizona, where a wildfire turned the sky orange and ash rained down like snow. Claire helped evacuate a local stable, loading horses into trailers with shaking hands, adrenaline pounding. She stayed behind to calm a panicked mare until the flames were too close to ignore. When it was over, her clothes were black with soot and her lungs burned, but she'd saved the mare. For the first time in years, she felt alive again. And still, Ash haunted her. She wasn't sure if it was guilt, or grief, or hope that wouldn't die. Maybe all three. But through every mile, every job, every cold night and cracked hand, she carried him with her. He was more than a horse. He was her compass. It was a rainy Thursday in southern Utah when the letter found her. Claire had just come off a 12-hour shift at a local truck stop, her clothes damp with sweat and fryer grease, her body aching from too many nights of too little sleep. The mailbox she shared with 3 other renters in a rundown mobile home park had nothing but fast food flyers and overdue bills, until she saw it. A tan envelope, her name written in tight, familiar cursive. No return address, just a Montana postmark. She stared at it, fingers trembling as she slid it out. Her heart picked up a beat it hadn't known in years. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat on the edge of her sagging bed, staring at the handwriting like it was a ghost. Sam Hayes. The name hit her with the force of memory. Sam had been her father's old friend and neighbor, gruff, weathered, but good-hearted. He was the kind of man who could ride fence line all day, then fix your water pump before sundown without being asked. After her father's funeral, Sam had offered to help manage the ranch, but Claire, shattered and stubborn, had turned him down. She hadn't seen or spoken to him since the auction. The letter felt heavier than it should have, as if the paper inside held more than words. She finally opened it. The message was short, a page and a half, handwritten. Sam told her he'd taken over some land not far from her family's old ranch. He'd turned it into a sanctuary for wild Mustangs, a place for horses abandoned or rounded up from overgrazed plains, wounded in transport, or simply left behind. He said the place had grown over the years, more than he expected. He had people working with him now, volunteers, vets, youth programs. But that wasn't why he wrote. He told her there was a horse, scarred, quiet, older, one that didn't trust easily, a chestnut Mustang with a blaze. "He reminds me of one I saw you raise years ago," Sam wrote. "Thought you ought to know. If it's nothing, I apologize. But if it's him, maybe it's time you came home." Claire read the letter 3 times. The walls around her heart began to crack, slow and deep. That single line, "Maybe it's time you came home," rattled in her bones. Home. She hadn't let herself say that word in years. For hours she sat frozen, the letter on her lap, memories pulling her under like a riptide. The smell of alfalfa in the morning. The way Ash would paw at the stall door when he was hungry. Her father's laugh echoing through the barn. And that final moment. Ash's cry as the trailer door slammed shut. She hadn't cried in months, maybe longer. But that night, the flood came. When morning arrived, her decision was made. She quit the truck stop job the next day. The manager didn't ask questions. People didn't last long there anyway. She sold off what little she had, an old electric guitar from high school, a box of worn jackets, the cheap microwave she'd bought secondhand. It wasn't much, but enough to fill the tank of her beat-up Ford and cover a week's worth of motel rooms along the way. The drive from Utah to Montana was long and winding. She avoided interstates, preferring the quiet back roads that curled through ghost towns and open plains. Each mile peeled back layers she hadn't realized she'd grown. Cynicism, fatigue, fear. The Montana border sign hit her harder than she expected. The sight of that big sky again, the way it stretched wide and endless over rolling hills, was like taking a deep breath for the first time in years. It didn't heal everything, but it reminded her of who she used to be. She passed familiar landmarks, the crumbling silo where her dad once pulled her out of a snowbank, the ridge where she'd taken her first solo ride on Ash. Towns had changed, roads had cracked, but the land remembered her. When she finally reached the driveway that led to Sam's new ranch, the sun was just beginning to set. Golden light spilled across the fields, illuminating fence posts and wind-worn barns. Horses dotted the distant pastures, some grazing, some running free. A banner on the gate read, "Hayes Mustang Haven, a place to heal." Claire paused before driving through, hands gripping the steering wheel tight. She didn't know what she would find. She didn't know if it really was Ash. She didn't even know if she could face it, any of it. But she drove forward anyway. Because even if that horse with the blaze wasn't him, even if her heart broke all over again, she needed to see for herself. She owed him that much. And maybe, just maybe, she owed it to herself, too. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Claire's pickup as she rolled down the long dirt road leading into Sam Hayes' ranch. The land stretched wide on both sides, kissed by late summer sunlight, with golden grasses swaying gently under the Montana sky. Time hadn't stopped here. Fences had been mended, new structures added, fields expanded. But the soul of the land, That deep, quiet strength she remembered from childhood was still there. The old sign that once marked her father's eastern fence line had been replaced by a sturdy archway painted in fresh white with bold black lettering, Hayes Mustang Haven. Underneath the arch, two weathered Mustangs grazed side by side, tails flicking at flies. Claire slowed to a stop and cut the engine. For a moment, she just sat. The air was dry, clean, and familiar. A hawk circled high overhead. The scent of horses and hay reached her through the open window. Pulling at memories she thought she'd buried too deep to surface. Her throat tightened. Every inch of this place whispered her past. The corral where she learned to rope. The barn where her father taught her to saddle a horse. The sloped hill where Ash took his first galloping steps. Stepping out of the truck, she felt the land under her boots again. Solid, grounding, real. She moved toward the house slowly, her gaze shifting to the buildings beyond. What had once been a modest, aging ranch was now a bustling haven. Several large corrals bordered the main pastures, filled with horses of every shade and size. A freshly painted stable stood at the edge of the main yard, connected to a large paddock and a covered training ring. Off to the side, a greenhouse and a chicken coop hinted at self-sufficiency. But it wasn't the improvements that caught Claire's breath. It was the landscape, the backdrop of towering cottonwoods, the far-off river glinting in the light, the open silence broken only by wind and hoofbeats. This was home. And it hurt more than she expected. A voice called her name from the porch. Sam. Older now, more gray in his beard, but the same weather-worn eyes. He didn't rush to greet her. He just nodded, almost like an invitation rather than a welcome. And she nodded back. That was enough. No need for grand reunions. The land had already said hello. They walked the property in silence at first. Sam let her take it in. The rebuilt fences, the expanded barn, the herd that now called this place home. He explained little, pointing things out quietly. Claire followed, taking note of the horses more than anything else. Some were nervous, some curious. Many bore the signs of past hardship, scars, limps, thin coats, wary eyes. Yet in this place, they were healing. She could feel it in the way they moved. Free, unhurried, watched over. Her heart ached with longing and guilt all at once. Then, near the far end of the property, just beyond the main pasture, she saw him. A chestnut Mustang stood alone in a small turnout corral. His coat was rougher than she remembered, dusted with age and sun. Faint scars traced the muscles along his flank and shoulder. His head was lowered, eyes half-lidded, body still. But something in his stance made her stop. She didn't need to see his face to know. Even from this distance, her soul recognized him. Ash. She didn't move closer, not yet. Instead, she stood at the fence, watching him. He looked worn, different, but the fire in him, though dulled, wasn't gone. His tail swished lazily as he lifted his head. For a second, his ears twitched toward her, but he made no other move. Their eyes didn't meet. Not yet. Sam stopped beside her, resting his arms on the top rail. He came in rough, he said after a long pause. Found him in a back lot of a failed breeding facility 3 years ago. Starved, half lame, took nearly a year before he'd let anyone near. No brand, no papers. But I remembered that blaze. Claire couldn't speak. The world had narrowed to the space between her and the horse. I thought he was wild at first, Sam continued, but he knew things. Gaits, commands, the way he moved in a round pen. Not wild. Just Forgotten. Claire's eyes burned. Ash turned slowly, his body stiff from old injuries. He stepped closer to the edge of the corral, still not looking directly at her. He paused a few feet from the fence and lowered his head to graze. Acting indifferent, but Claire saw the way his ear stayed cocked toward her. The distance between them wasn't just space. It was years of pain, abandonment, a promise broken by time and necessity. She didn't call his name. She didn't reach out. Not yet. Instead, she stayed where she was, letting the silence settle between them like dust. Because this was no movie reunion. This was something harder, something earned, and the past didn't unravel in a moment. It came apart slowly, like knots worked loose by tired hands. Claire knew one thing now, clear as the Montana sky overhead. She wasn't leaving without him. Claire returned to the corral before sunrise. The Montana sky was still painted in bruised hues of purple and gray as she stepped out into the crisp morning air, jacket collar pulled up against the chill. The ranch was quiet, horses still resting, the wind gentle against the tall grass. She moved without sound, guided by instinct, as if her feet knew the path before her mind did. Ash stood exactly where he had the night before. Same turnout corral, same quiet distance from the fence. He didn't move when she approached. His head hung low, eyes half closed. In that way, horses rested, but never truly slept. Always alert, even in stillness. Claire eased up to the fence, laying both hands gently across the top rail. She said nothing, just watched. Let the silence build. Let the scent of the old land and the chill of dawn fill her lungs. Then, slowly, deliberately, she whispered one word, Ash. His ears twitched first, then his head lifted. The moment felt suspended in glass. He didn't bolt. He didn't approach. He simply turned his head toward her, one slow breath at a time, and stared. His eyes, dark and wide, locked with hers. There was confusion there, hesitation, a flash of something deeper, recognition buried under layers of time and hardship. Claire stayed still. She whispered his name again, barely audible, as if afraid the sound might break whatever fragile thread now stretched between them. Ash. He took a step forward. Not a full stride. Just a shift of weight, hooves sliding slightly in the soft earth. Then another. His nostrils flared. He lifted his head, the blaze down his face catching the light of the rising sun. And in that light, golden, delicate, true, Claire saw it. The spark. The unmistakable flicker of memory in his eyes. When he reached the edge of the fence, he paused, his breath steaming in the cold morning air. Claire didn't reach out. She waited, gave him the choice. He leaned in, his muzzle pressed gently against her hand. Warm, solid, real. And that was all it took. The dam inside her shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping down her cheeks as she ran her fingers along his face, the bone structure unchanged, even after all these years. His coat was rougher now, his body leaner, but beneath it all, he was still Ash. Her Ash, the foal she'd raised, the Mustang who once galloped with fire in his veins. She pressed her forehead gently to his, just as she'd done 1,000 times before, in another life. The weight of the years between them fell away. Somewhere behind her, the sun broke over the ridge, casting long shadows across the field. The light touched the fence, the dirt, the horse, the girl, now a woman, who had waited so long for this moment. It was not a grand reunion. It wasn't clean or dramatic, but it was sacred. The ranch began to stir. Hooves clopped in distant stalls. A truck engine started near the main barn. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, everything else faded. Sam arrived an hour later, stepping up beside her, arms folded across his chest. He didn't speak right away, just nodded once at the sight before him. "I guess it really is him," he said finally. Claire nodded. Her voice was still too raw to answer. Ash didn't move away. He stayed close, letting her fingers trace the contours of his neck, his withers, the faint scars along his ribcage. Each mark told a story she hadn't witnessed, each one a reminder of the years they'd spent apart. She'd dreamed of this reunion, imagined it 100 different ways, but none of them had captured the truth. The truth was simpler. He remembered her. And he'd forgiven her. The ranch crew began to gather. Word spread fast. Volunteers paused their chores, peeking around corners and over fences. A few whispered. Some stood silent, watching the Mustang who had never let anyone near suddenly lean into a woman's touch, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was a sight none of them would forget. Sam finally spoke again, softer this time. "You know what this means?" Claire didn't answer. "It means he's yours again." But she shook her head. "No," she finally whispered, still stroking Ash's cheek. "It means I have to earn it." She knew it wouldn't be easy. He'd survived too much, suffered too long. Trust wasn't something that returned with a name alone. It had to be rebuilt. Day by day, step by step. Just like she would rebuild herself. But she was ready now. Ready to stay, ready to fight. Not just for Ash, but for the girl she once was, and the woman she was becoming. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of memory, guilt, and aching resolve. Claire woke each morning before dawn, drawn to the same small corral where Ash now stood, more alert, more present. She brought him fresh hay herself, carried water in the chill morning air, and stood by the fence for long stretches without touching him, just existing in his space, letting him relearn her presence without pressure. But even as their bond began to gently rekindle, Claire found herself haunted by what she now knew and what she didn't. Sam filled in the missing years one quiet evening while they stood outside the barn, watching the orange sun sink behind the hills. Ash's journey after the auction had been long and cruel. The man Claire sold him to had good intentions. He ran a small rescue near the Wyoming border. But not long after, that man lost the property in a lawsuit. The horses, including Ash, were dispersed in a chaotic fire sale. Ash was traded hands like livestock, passed from one unstable owner to the next, shuffled through feedlots, backwater breeding operations, and eventually into a neglect case that made the local news. By the time Sam found him, Ash was half-starved and dangerously defensive, kept in a rusted pen with nothing but mud under his hooves and old wire for shelter. Sam hadn't recognized him at first. The Mustang was scarred, thin, and didn't respond to people. But the blaze down his face, the fire in his eyes, even dulled by trauma, was unmistakable once Claire's name came back into memory. That's when Sam decided to write the letter. Claire couldn't breathe as Sam recounted the timeline. Every year she spent drifting from town to town, searching auctions and rescues with blind hope. Ash had been suffering, alone, betrayed, fighting to survive in a world that had failed him again and again, and she hadn't been there. That night, she sat outside his corral long after the moon had risen, knees pulled to her chest, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Ash slept standing, as horses do, but every so often, he'd flick an ear in her direction, acknowledging her presence. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to scream that she'd looked for him, that she hadn't known, that she'd sold him with good intentions and never stopped feeling the ache of that decision. But words couldn't touch the truth of it. Not now. So instead, she made him a promise. Not out loud, not to be heard, but to be felt in every action that would follow. She would never leave him again. The following week, Claire asked Sam for work. He hesitated at first. She could see it in his eyes. Not doubt, just caution. The same way Ash watched her, curious but guarded, but she insisted. She didn't want charity. She needed to earn her place again. Sam put her on feed duty and barn cleanup, alongside a few of the regular volunteers. Claire worked in silence, driving herself harder than anyone else. She stacked hay, scrubbed water troughs, repaired fences, and swept out stalls until her back screamed. It wasn't about proving herself to Sam or anyone else. It was about making things right. She started studying Ash's movements from a distance, watching the way he reacted to other horses, how he grazed, how his muscles shifted when something startled him. He was no longer the bold, reckless colt she remembered. He carried himself with a kind of cautious wisdom now, aware of every angle, every step. But slowly his walls began to lower. One morning, she entered the corral with a soft brush. No halter, no lead rope. She simply stood, waiting. Ash didn't move away. He watched her for a long time. The breeze pulled at his mane, and the sun cast faint shadows over the scars along his back. Then, cautiously, he stepped closer. Claire remained still, breathing evenly. When he reached her, he lowered his head. She lifted the brush and touched it gently to his neck. He flinched, but didn't step back. She began brushing in slow, deliberate strokes. The dust came off in layers, and under it, the sheen of his coat began to return. With each stroke, she whispered nothing. No apologies, no explanations, just silence and care. Every day after that, she came back, first brushing, then gentle groundwork, leading him in circles, letting him relearn commands through movement and feel. Ash was hesitant. Some days, he shut down entirely, his eyes turning distant again. But she didn't push. She let the process unfold on his terms, not hers. Claire was learning too, not just about Ash, but about herself. The girl who once dreamed in gallops and wide skies had become someone tougher, quieter, more patient. And now, in this space, she was starting to stitch those pieces back together. One afternoon, after weeks of gentle work, Ash followed her freely from the paddock to the open ring without a lid. Claire stopped walking and turned around. Ash stopped behind her, waiting. She didn't cry this time. She simply reached back and rested her hand on his shoulder, and he stayed. Summer deepened, and with it came longer days filled with sweat, dust, and quiet progress. The ranch bustled with movement. New rescues arriving, volunteers hammering fences, children learning to groom ponies. But Claire's world had narrowed to a single focus. Ash. Each morning before the sun fully rose, she greeted him with a soft whistle and a handful of feed. By now he recognized the rhythm of her footsteps, the familiar sound of her boots on gravel. He met her at the gate, calm but always alert, his body language softening day by day. They'd found a rhythm together, one born of patience, repetition, and something deeper that didn't need a name. Claire never rushed him. She never tied him down or used force. The groundwork became a conversation of movement, backing up, yielding shoulders, soft turns on cue. She taught him again how to respond to pressure without fear, how to trust the touch of a hand or the guidance of a lead. Some days he hesitated. Some days he simply refused. But she never punished hesitation. She treated it like a door left ajar, waiting for the wind to shift. Progress came in inches. Then, one morning, it came in a leap. Ash had been watching the other horses in the training ring. A young mare had just finished a session with a volunteer, and Claire saw the way his ears flicked toward them, the subtle lift in his posture. He was curious, interested. It was the first time he'd shown anything close to eagerness in weeks. That afternoon, Claire slipped into the tack room. She didn't grab a bridle, just a worn saddle pad and an old leather saddle she used to ride in as a teenager, the one with her father's initials still etched into the cinch. She carried it out to the training ring and laid it gently across the fence rail. Then she waited. Ash stood in the paddock, head low, tail flicking lazily at flies. She whistled once. He looked up. She walked slowly toward him with the saddle pad in her arms. No halter, no rope, just the pad. She paused a few feet away and knelt in the dirt, letting him see it, smell it, process the moment. Then she stood and walked a wide arc around him before easing up to his side. He didn't flinch when she laid the pad across his back. She cinched it lightly, then removed it. Did it again. Repetition, reassurance. By the fifth time, he stood still, eyes calm. The saddle came next. He tensed when the leather touched his side, muscles tightening, jaw shifting. Claire let the weight sit there, unmoving. She didn't tighten the girth, just let it rest. After a few minutes, she removed it and gave him space. The next day, she saddled him again. This time, he didn't tense. By the end of the week, she cinched it tight and walked him around the pen. His steps were slow, unsure, but steady. She didn't mount. Not yet. That would come when he told her he was ready. And finally, one golden afternoon, as the sun lowered behind the hills and the shadows stretched long across the pasture, he gave her the signal. He stood by the mounting block after their groundwork, ears forward, tail still, eyes steady. Claire approached, one hand on the horn of the saddle, the other resting lightly on his withers. She hesitated, heart pounding, not from fear of him bucking, but from the emotion bubbling beneath the surface. She placed her boot in the stirrup and swung her leg over, settling into the saddle with a care she hadn't known in years. Her hands trembled as she found her seat, and for a brief moment, everything around her disappeared. The barn, the voices, the sky itself. It was just her and Ash. He shifted once beneath her, then stood still. No explosion, no panic, just breath, his and hers, mingling in the warm, quiet air. Claire closed her eyes and let the tears fall silently. It wasn't the ride itself that broke her. It was the fact that he allowed it. That after everything, years of separation, betrayal, pain, he still chose to carry her. They didn't move far, just a slow walk around the pen, one lap, then another. His gait was uneven at times, a hint of stiffness in the right hind leg where an old injury lingered. But he moved with dignity, ears twitching at her cues, responding to the soft shifts in her weight. It was like remembering an old language, not perfect, but fluent enough to speak again. When she dismounted, she pressed her face against his neck and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding since the day he left. The ranch crew heard about it within the hour. By dinner, the story had spread. The Mustang no one could touch had been ridden again. But those who passed the ring that evening didn't see triumph. They saw stillness. A woman sitting quietly beside a horse, brushing his mane with slow, reverent strokes as the sun disappeared beyond the hills. It wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. Late summer rolled into early fall with a slow-burning beauty that painted the Montana plains in gold and rust. Mornings came cooler, horses breathed steam into the air, and the light began to stretch longer shadows across the land. By now, Claire and Ash had found a new rhythm, one built on earned trust, not nostalgia. Their rides grew longer, stretching beyond the perimeter of the ranch, into open pastures and forgotten trails that traced the edges of old forest lines and winding creeks. Ash had changed, not just physically, though his coat gleamed again, and his gait, while cautious, had steadied, but in his spirit. There was a calmness to him now, a gravity. He no longer flinched at passing riders or snapped his head toward every sudden sound. He moved with quiet confidence, listening to Claire's cues, sometimes anticipating them. The wild energy that once defined him had not vanished. It had matured, deepened, as though all his suffering had been forged into something resilient and whole. But it was never gone. That wildness still lived in his blood. Claire saw it the day they crested the ridge behind the northern field. It was a crisp afternoon. The wind carried the scent of pine and the rustle of dry leaves. Ash moved beneath her like a shadow, responsive and fluid, his ears flicking forward with every distant sound. She let the reins hang loose, letting him pick the pace. They hadn't planned to ride far, but the air felt good, and the trail beckoned. Then, as they reached the top of the ridge, everything changed. A herd appeared, wild Mustangs, maybe 15 of them, grazing in the open flats below. Their coats gleamed in the sun, every shade from smoky gray to pale roan to deep black. They moved in unison, a living tapestry of muscle and instinct. No fences, no halters, just freedom. Ash stopped. His entire body went still, ears pointed, nostrils wide. He didn't move forward or back, he just stared. Claire's breath caught. She could feel it, the tension in his frame, the invisible thread pulling him forward. Something ancient stirred in him, something older than memory or training. His kind, his blood, ran wild with them. Out there was the life his ancestors had known. No pens, no stalls, just wind and space and the call of the open earth. Ash lowered his head slightly, shifting his weight forward. Claire didn't stop him. She didn't tighten the reins or press her heels. Instead, she loosened her grip and slowly dismounted, her boots crunching on dry grass. She removed the saddle, then the blanket, setting them gently on the ground. Ash turned his head briefly toward her, but then refocused on the herd. She stood beside him, resting one hand against his shoulder. No words, no pleading, just stillness. She knew what this moment was. A test, not of control, but of choice. He took one step forward, then another. Claire didn't follow. Her heart pounded, every beat an ache. She wanted to call his name, wanted to remind him of the years, the bond, the nights they spent rebuilding what was lost. But this wasn't about her. It never had been. This was about him, and the question that had lingered ever since she found him again. Would he stay, or would he go? Ash stopped at the edge of the ridge. The herd below moved slowly, unaware of his presence. A few of them lifted their heads, ears turning. A young stallion let out a low call. One of the mares answered. Ash raised his head, tail flicking, and then slowly he turned around. He walked back toward Claire, not hurried, not uncertain, deliberate. She didn't move. When he reached her, he lowered his head and nudged her shoulder. Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her knees nearly buckled, not from relief, but from the weight of what his choice meant. He'd seen freedom, felt it, smelled it in the wind. And he came back. Together they stood on the ridge for a long while, watching the Mustangs graze below. Ash didn't look again. He stayed at her side, content, not tethered, never that, but grounded in something deeper than instinct. He had chosen her. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. They rode back to the ranch, slowly, in silence. And that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fields turned amber, Claire sat beside Ash in the paddock. She didn't brush him or feed him. She just sat. Let the dust settle around them. Let the day finish on its own. Ash lowered himself onto the ground beside her. A rare act for a horse, especially one so proud and alert. He lay there, breathing slowly, eyes half closed, and Claire knew. Their bond was no longer a memory or a hope. It was real. It was now. The first frost settled on the grass like a soft warning, subtle, beautiful, inevitable. Montana's fall was always short-lived, and winter loomed on the horizon like a distant storm. But this time, Claire didn't feel the weight of the coming cold. She felt a quiet urgency, a purpose. The ride with Ash on the ridge had changed something in her. Not just in him, in her too. After everything they'd endured, it wasn't enough to simply heal. It wasn't enough to be reunited. There had to be more. Some form of meaning behind all the pain they had both carried for years. Ash had chosen to stay. Now it was time to create something worth staying for. The idea came slowly, then all at once. One morning, as she stood watching a new rescue, a blind Appaloosa mare trembling in the corner of a paddock, she felt the pull of something greater. That mare wasn't just another broken animal. She was a story, a survivor, and she deserved not just a stall and food, but a place to become whole again. Just like Ash had, just like Claire. That evening, Claire sat with Sam on the porch steps, the chill of night creeping in around them. The sky above them was littered with stars. A blanket of silence wrapped around the ranch, broken only by the soft sound of horses shifting in their stalls. Claire spoke carefully, with weight behind her words. She didn't ask. She didn't propose. She declared it. They would turn this place into a sanctuary, not just for horses, but for people too. For those who, like Ash, had been discarded, misunderstood, or mistreated. For teens drowning in silence. For veterans haunted by pasts they couldn't outrun. For anyone who needed space to breathe, to listen, to remember what it felt like to matter. Sam didn't respond right away. He simply stared into the dark. And then, with the smallest nod, he said yes. It began with a single stall cleared out for a young runaway who'd been caught stealing from a nearby feed store. Instead of jail, Sam offered him a week of work mucking stalls. The boy arrived angry, silent, guarded. Claire paired him with an older gelding with a gentle soul. Within 3 days, the boy was brushing the horse and sleeping in the hayloft. Word spread quietly. Local shelters, counselors, veterans' clinics. People began calling, asking if they could send someone, just for a day, maybe a weekend. And Claire said yes to every single one. The barn grew busier. Volunteers doubled. A retired therapist offered free sessions on-site once a week. Donations trickled in. A box of old grooming supplies, a stack of gently used boots, a pallet of hay from a neighboring rancher. Someone delivered lumber with no return address. Another left envelopes of cash in the mailbox. People wanted to help, because they'd heard the story. Not Claire's, not Sam's, Ash's. He had become a symbol, an old, scarred Mustang who trusted again, who chose connection after abandonment, who stood tall with the herd, not behind a fence, but at the center of it. Ash wasn't just a horse now. He was a leader. Whenever a new horse arrived, timid, injured, feral, it was Ash who walked to the paddock first. He never rushed. He approached with slow, measured steps. Sometimes it took hours, sometimes days, but always, eventually, the new horse would lean into him, letting out that deep, tired breath that said, "I'm safe now." Claire watched it unfold again and again. Ash didn't command the herd, he grounded it. Even the barn staff began calling him the heart of the haven, and he deserved every syllable. Claire's days were long, her body aching by nightfall, but the ache was welcome. It reminded her that she was building something, with her own hands, her own choices. She no longer ran from her past. She used it. Every broken step had led her here. Every failure had carved out space for something truer. There were setbacks. A late foal arrived sick and didn't survive. A winter storm knocked out power for 2 days. A rescued stallion kicked through a gate and spooked 3 volunteers. But even in the chaos, no one quit. They leaned on each other. The ranch was no longer just Sam's. It belonged to every soul who had touched it, whether hooved or human. Ash, now older, carried his years with grace. His stride had slowed, and on colder mornings, he moved stiffly. But when he stood in the pasture, wind teasing through his mane, he still looked every bit the wild creature Claire had once raised from a foal. Only now, there was wisdom in his stillness. And Claire, no longer the girl who cried beside an empty fence post, was finally whole. The sanctuary wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And with each horse that arrived, each person who healed beside them, Claire felt something rise inside her again. Hope. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long golden rays over the fields, dusting the paddocks in amber light. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves on the cottonwoods, and a faint rhythm of hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Soft, measured, familiar. Claire stood by the pasture gate, watching a group of young foals gallop across the open field, their legs awkward but full of energy, their joy unfiltered and wild. Behind them walked Ash. His gait was slower now, his joints stiffened with the weight of age, his once glossy coat dusted with gray around the muzzle and along his back. But he held his head high, his presence quiet and strong. The foals clustered around him like satellites, trusting his calm. He didn't lead with force. He never had. He led by standing steady when others trembled, by waiting when others rushed, by being still when everything else was uncertain. Claire rested her arms on the fence rail. The sanctuary had changed over the years. It was no longer a patchwork of makeshift paddocks and scattered supplies. The barns had been expanded, the fencing replaced. The pasture lands rotated with care. A new education center stood near the front entrance now, simple but full of light, where volunteers and guests learned about wild Mustangs, trauma recovery, and land conservation. People came from all over the state now, some just to help, some to heal. Sam had finally taken a step back, spending more time fishing and less time fixing fence posts. He still dropped by most mornings with coffee in hand, ready to lend advice or tell a story to the newest volunteers. He called Claire the boss now with a half smirk and a full heart. She never corrected him. Time had etched itself into the wood of the ranch, into the paths they all walked daily. Yet for all the changes, the soul of the place had stayed the same. The sanctuary still pulsed with the rhythm of hooves and wind and breath, and at the heart of it all, still, was Ash. He no longer worked directly with the rescues or carried riders, but he didn't need to. His presence alone settled the nervous, calmed the wild. New arrivals, no matter how broken, always seemed to find their way to his side. It was as if he absorbed their fear and gave back peace. Claire walked toward the pasture slowly, boots crunching over dry grass. Ash lifted his head at her approach. She didn't call his name. She didn't have to. Their connection had long outgrown words. When she reached him, she pressed her hand to his withers and stood beside him in silence, both of them facing the sunlit field where young Mustangs played. She thought back to the beginning, to the girl she'd been, the one who stood sobbing as a trailer door shut, as the horse she loved disappeared down a dirt road. That girl had carried shame, guilt, and the unbearable weight of goodbye. But she had also carried a promise, a vow whispered through tears, "I'll find you again." And she had. But more than that, she'd found herself. Claire wasn't just a caretaker now. She was a mentor, a guide. Young volunteers came to her not just for horse advice, but for life. They asked about her story, wide-eyed and hungry for meaning. And while she rarely told it in full, she always made sure they understood one truth. Healing isn't a straight line. It twists. It doubles back. It waits for you to be ready. That afternoon, a new group of volunteers arrived. 2 high school students, a veteran, and a foster youth from the reservation. Claire watched from the hilltop as one of the young foals cautiously approached the girl from the reservation. The girl stood frozen, unsure what to do. The foal took another step forward. Ash watched it too, ears perked, unmoving. Then, slowly, he stepped closer, not to intervene, but to witness, to show, once again, that trust isn't forced, it's invited. Claire smiled. Years ago, she had imagined this place as a dream barely possible, a refuge, a home, a second chance for creatures and people who had been thrown aside. But now it was real, tangible, lived in. And she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something that would outlast her. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the pasture, Claire wrapped an old wool blanket around her shoulders and leaned back against the fence. Ash lowered himself to the ground beside her, groaning gently with the effort, and lay still in the fading light. Together, they watched the foals. New life, new beginnings, born into safety, into a world forged from pain but shaped by care. Claire reached down and rested her hand lightly on Ash's neck. He didn't stir. He didn't need to, because they had made it, not just back to each other, but beyond.